Motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda as amended. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes of the previous meeting. Everybody has a chance to take a look at those. The previous meeting has presented. Second. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Mayor, good to have you this morning. Do you have anything you'd like to pass along to us?
No, sir, just came to visit and listen in. Appreciate the invites.
Thank you for coming. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he can introduce Jeff.
Yeah. Good morning, gentlemen. Jeff Barber with Barger McDonald is here today. They did a sanitary system flow study for us. They're going to present the results to the board. Graham and I have already met with them to finalize this. I think I'm really impressed with the information we were able to come up with from the study. I think it will provide a good direction for our community and moving our sanitary sewer system forward. And I want to have that presentation available to the board. I think it's a pretty important project for us. And with that, I'll kind of hand it over to Jeff here.
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to be very light on the speaking role this morning. Dustin Hill is online. I was telling the mayor back there that his family's been a little bit ill this week, and we just wanted to make sure we didn't carry anything from St. Louis to Marshall spread. So Dustin's going to participate virtually. I do want to say thank you to y'all for everything that we've been able to partner on over the last couple of years at the wastewater plant and now on the sewer collection side. This conversation about the sewer collection and the flow data took 2 hours, and we're trying to consolidate that into 10 slides and hopefully 15, 20 minutes or less. So Dustin is going to do his best to communicate what we were able to discover through that exercise and maybe some next steps. But again, I appreciate everybody. Hope you all have a great holiday, and I look forward to this conversation. With that, Dustin, you can go ahead and take it away if you can hear me.
I think we're still waiting on
Need somebody?
our screen.
He said he lost his cable, like his HDMI. So I've got 2 things in front of you. One of them is a printout of the slides, just in case the technology didn't work out. And the other one is the flyer. I think we put a version of the other single-sided or double-sided piece of paper in with your bills, I think last year, ahead of this flow data study. But we can wait on the cable, Jeff, if you want to, or we can proceed.
Let's have him go ahead. And I think, Dustin, are you on there? See you muted.
Yeah, I'm on here. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah, we've got the handouts here. I think if you could just kind of, identify each slide for discussion. I think the board would follow along. They've got the information they need.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll go ahead and get started then. So we can start with the agenda slide. So the presentation today is kind of broken down into trying to help us answer kind of 4 questions, which is really what the scope of this project is really all about. So the first question is we'll kind of recap a bit on just what I&I is and how it can impact the wastewater system. Followed by that, we'll kind of talk about the tools that we use, the strategies behind what is flow monitoring, and how do we use it to understand I&I throughout the wastewater collection system. Then we'll kind of talk about the third bullet point, which really says results, what did we learn? And then finally, we'll kind of wrap up with, okay, now that we know a bit more about I&I, what are the next steps to kind of paving a path forward? So I'll switch to the next slide now. So what is inflow and infiltration? So to kind of understand it at a high level, first you need to understand the underground systems. So if you look at the picture on the left, you can kind of see 2 completely independent sewers, one called a separate storm sewer, and then a second called the wastewater system. So the wastewater system kind of has the brown flow moving through it, and the separate storm sewer system has the rainwater, which is represented by blue. So in an ideal world, they do just that. The wastewater system takes the flows from residents and businesses and moves those to the wastewater treatment plant. And then during rainfall events, you know, that rainfall is captured on the surface and conveyed through the separate storm sewer system. But in reality, kind of what ends up happening is kind of what you see on the right-hand side of the photo on the right, if you will. Over time, you know, with aging infrastructure, you know, those pipes begin to break down, manholes begin to break down. We find root intrusion, and what happens is that stormwater ends up getting into the wastewater system. And that kind of phenomenon, if you will, is what we refer to as I&I. You know, and it's really just the presence of stormwater getting into the wastewater system at the highest level. So, so as we talk about I&I, you know, really the questions we want to ask ourselves is, okay, how does this I&I impact the community? So a couple of things to talk about is, you know, the first is, you know, when that rainwater gets into the system, all of that is ultimately routed to the wastewater treatment plant, and you know that wastewater treatment plant then has to treat a significant amount more flow than it does during typical dry weather operations, which can be very problematic. It also can create large peak flows in the wastewater system, and those systems aren't necessarily designed to convey all those flows. So it ultimately could result in sewer overflows or basement backups, you know, during really large rainfall events. And then finally, you know, the stormwater that's in the system, you know, it has to be conveyed through the collection system, through lift stations, and ultimately make its way through the wastewater treatment plant. And that the cost and energy related to that transport and treat is ultimately clean water, you know, the water that's not intended to be in that system. So that's why I&I is important, you know, because these are all negative things due to that stormwater entering the wastewater system. So that was really the guidelines for this project, is really understanding how much I&I is getting into the system and where it's getting into the system. So to kind of help evaluate that, we deployed a series of 9 flow monitors, which are basically a device that we put directly into the wastewater system, and we put these 9 meters in key locations throughout the system. So on the map, you can kind of see some stars. Those stars represent the specific locations where we installed the flow monitors. And then the polygons, if you will, the different shapes and the different colors, those represent the collection systems that's flowing to that point. So by doing this, we're now able to kind of characterize the system as a collection of basins versus just independent sewers. So the map kind of really represents how we were able to break up the system to kind of help us understand where the flow, where this I&I is getting into the system. In addition to the flow monitors, you know, not only are we monitoring flow during dry weather conditions, but we're monitoring flows during wet weather conditions. So we want to understand how much rainfall is causing those changes in flows that we'll see in the data. So we put in rain gauges, which ultimately just measure the rain. And we had those installed in 3 locations, one at the Southwest Lift Station, one at the wastewater treatment plant, and then one at the very northern part of town, to try to understand how that rainfall passed throughout the community, just because it is possible for possibly a rainfall event to come to the north part of town but kind of miss the south part of town, which would have an impact on the readings of the data. So so we tried to spatially kind of spread those apart, if you will, to make sure that we had good rainfall coverage while we're collecting the data. So the flow monitoring period itself was a total of 60 days that we kind of happened in the early spring into the early parts of summer. And that ultimately is the field services piece of the scope, is the putting the meters in, measuring everything, and then kind of come and capturing those out. And then we kind of move into really the analysis part of the project, which is really when we start to understand what it's telling us. All right, so flipping on to the next slide. So you should see on the slide kind of a graphic that has a chart on the right that has some green lines. So what this chart is really asking ourselves is how do we use this data that's captured by these flow monitors? Well, ultimately what they're doing is every 15 minutes it's taking a reading, which allows us to understand the flow. And then if we connected all of those readings through that 60-day period, you ultimately get the green line that you're seeing kind of on the bottom of the slide. So that represents the flow in the wastewater system beginning in early April and extending to early June. And then at the top of the chart, you can kind of see the actual rainfall data. So as you see, when the larger rainfall events occur, meaning the bigger black bars, you can also see the larger green bars that kind of come up, and that is really the impacts of that I&I. One other thing to kind of point out is, we kind of look at two things, wet weather and dry weather flows. So the timing between the bars, we kind of look at and determine, okay, are these dry weather days or are these wet weather days? Are these days where the system's responding to that rainfall? And we kind of do that for all of the days as part of the analysis. So, we might have 30 wet days and 30 dry days, and that allows us to kind of understand the differences between those two system responses. So flipping to the next slide, you should see kind of a wheel that outlines 6 steps. So the question becomes, why do we do flow monitoring? What do we really get out of that? And to kind of answer that, I&I is a very complex issue. There's a lot of different ways that stormwater can kind of get into the system. So flow monitoring allows us to, from a very high level, understand where the I&I is getting into the system. And that allows us to prioritize some of the next steps and further assessing and characterizing that. Because flow monitoring allows us to characterize the I&I on those basin levels, and then the next steps involves additional field services, which will allow us to actually tie down and understand where are the sources that are actually causing the I&I. So the 3 steps on the right we kind of think of as assessment, and then the 3 steps on the left-hand side of the wheel, steps 4, 5, and 6, really is targeting the specific defects and then supporting the removal of the I&I. And flow monitoring really starts this process of a comprehensive I&I strategic plan, which allows us to be very cost efficient with the I&I removal, because it can be expensive to take I&I out of the system if you're trying to remove every defect that you find. But by taking this process, we can identify the most impactful types of defects that's causing I&I throughout the community, and we can be more cost efficient in its removal. All right, so advancing the slides, should see a slide now called dry weather flow conditions. So as I mentioned previously, one of the things that we really want to do is establish a baseline. So how does the system respond during dry weather conditions? What do we expect on a day-to-day basis? And we kind of establish that baseline at every one of these flow monitoring locations. And it helps us understand where wastewater is generated within the system and how it's routed to the wastewater treatment plant. So depending on whether it's a weekday or a weekend, during the flow monitoring period, we found that collectively we were routing about 2.2 to about 2.5 MGD to the wastewater treatment plant, and we were able to distribute that at each of these flow monitoring locations. And so that kind of gives us a baseline as to what's occurring during dry weather typical conditions. So that's kind of the first step in the process to understanding that. And then I'll go to the next slide. So as we think about the wet weather component now, I wanted to revisit this concept of the I&I, because there's kind of 2 things that happen with I&I. There's defects that are directly connected, and that's the first part of I is inflow. So things, if you're looking at the picture, some things that would be inflow related would be potentially downspouts that would be connected into the wastewater system, potentially uncapped cleanouts that could be draining some of the portions of someone's front yard. You could also have stormwater, either directly or indirect connections between the stormwater system and the wastewater system. All of these types of defects are ultimately what's causing the really big peaks that you see on the graph. So where you have the rapid response, those inflow types of defects really drive that behavior. And then the second I, which is infiltration, is really focused on all of the defects that are shown in the black text in the photo above. So that, again, that's more tied to aging infrastructure and the groundwater within the system ultimately leaching into that system, which causes a much slower response to getting back to those dry weather flow conditions. So when we really look at the analysis of the wet weather data, we're really looking for two things. Where are the basins that are causing these large wet weather peak flows, which would be these large green bars? And then also, where is the most amount of I&I getting into the system? And this would be measured on that basin level. So if we can understand those two things, that provides us some guidance as to what next steps to take and which basins to go start attacking some of these things based off the findings from the flow analysis.
Hey,
So,
Justin, hold on.
yeah, Jeff?
Yeah. So we're on slide 7, which is on page 4 of the handout. So what Dustin's gone over so far is kind of what we did, where we put the meters, kind of where we put the rain gauges, how long we studied it, tracking that average day, like dry weather condition, and then tracking what happens during a wet weather condition. So the really cool stuff is coming up. So Dustin's kind of laid the foundation so far of kind of what we did and why. But the next piece of this presentation is going to start on, it's going to have the red, orange, and green on it. Not red, orange, and green, but red, orange, and yellow on it. But I just want to make sure everybody's keeping up. Is this the right level of detail for everybody in the room? Ken, you're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody's, okay, good. Just want to make sure. It's early. It's Friday.
I agree. All right, so I'm kind of advancing this slide, and we should now be looking at a slide that says wet weather peaking factors. So just to provide some perspective of, as we look at that graph, you'll see some numbers that sit above the, it says PF equals 5.3, for instance, on that basin to the left. So these are peaking factors, and really what this is a ratio of how much did that average daily flow increase during the largest wet weather events that was captured during the flow monitoring period. So for instance, FM 100 seen a 5.3 to 1 ratio between that peak wet weather flow during the rainfall event and then that average daily dry weather condition. So collectively, those peaking factors range from about 2.5 all the way up to about 10 in the worst basins. And the worst basin was FM 102, which is kind of in the southwest part of town, just upstream of the Southwest Lift Station, where it found 9.8. And then FM 104 and FM 105 are the three red basins collectively. Those were the basins where we've seen the greatest amount of peak flow occur. So again, within these basins, we would expect to see some of those potentially inflow or directly connected sources become out there. And then kind of the fourth bullet point, 6 of the 9 basins exceeds a 4 to 1 peaking factor. So we ask ourselves, why 4 to 1? Why does that even matter? Well, if we went out and we built a brand new system today, state guidance in terms of design of collection systems would kind of point us towards a 3 or a 4 to 1 peaking factor, meaning so basically during dry weather conditions, maybe somewhere between 10 to 25% of your pipe would be full with water, and that would leave 75% of that pipe available to convey that storm water if it would get into the system. So that kind of just gives a threshold of how what some of these numbers really mean. so the red basins, like I said, those were the basins that had the highest peaking factors, and then the yellow basins had the lowest peaking factors. So again, doesn't necessarily represent how much water is getting in. It just dictates the type of defects, and the type of behavior of those defects causes high peaking factors within these basins. And so kind of flipping the next slide, so this is kind of the opposite problem. This is how much water is getting into the system, or how much I&I is getting into the system, and where. So if we think about the wastewater treatment plant, all of these percentages add up to 100%, meaning like we basically took the total amount of I&I that we collected during the flow monitoring, and we were able to kind of distribute where it's coming in. So obviously one basin really stood out, the basin on the far west part of town, FM 100. Ultimately, basically 30% of the total I&I within the entire collection system entered the system in that basin, which is a significant number. And then, there's 3 basins: FM 100, FM 101, and then FM 102. Those 3 basins collectively drain to the southwest lift station, and those 3 basins, 50% of the total I&I within the community is ultimately transported and then conveyed through the southwest lift station. And if we kind of work from the lift station towards the wastewater treatment plant from west to east, we pick up FM 103 and FM 104. And when we pick those up, ultimately 78% of the total I&I volume that ends up at the wastewater treatment plant is conveyed through that southern gravity trunk sewer. And then the remaining 22% is captured in FM 106, 107, 105, and 108, which is kind of these yellow basins on the eastern part of town. So again, that really just helps us understand, if to get the greatest amount of I&I out of the system, these basins that drain to the southern gravity trunk sewer are going to be better targets to eliminate I&I volume, because there's a lot more present. So kind of wrapping all of this up, we really talk about, what are the next steps? How do we now that we know which basins generate the highest peak flows and which basins contain the most amount of I&I volume, we look towards our next 2 steps. So step 2 would be kind of a recommendation to do what's called sanitary sewer evaluation surveys. And really what that is, it's a combination of smoke testing, which kind of that picture up to the right really represents. And what that is we ultimately would pressurize the wastewater collection system to be able to identify the specific types of defects that are contributing I&I. So anywhere that smoke can exit the ground would mean that rainwater could enter the system. So it's a very efficient way of testing to try to find those large directly connected sources, which are typically very cost efficient to remove. The second piece of SSES, or those evaluations, would be just manhole inspections. Again, these are a very common place for I&I to enter the system, whether it's near the surface of the manhole lids or the manhole frames. So kind of direct runoff can enter the top end of the manhole, and then groundwater can obviously enter in through the sidewalls. So manhole inspections are a great way to go out and try to find some of those sources of I&I. So that's kind of step 2. And then step 3 would be development of a hydraulic model. And really, MMU taking on this flow monitoring scope, that's the first step in the modeling, is really capturing the behavior of the system during dry weather and wet weather. And building a hydraulic model helps us understand how that I&I we found in the system actually transports to the wastewater treatment plant, and we can determine where the parts of the system are that are struggling to convey that flow, which could potentially lead to basement backups or system backups during those large rainfall events. So if we can identify where those are at, we can actually put a goal on how much I&I we need to take out of the system in order to eliminate or at least mitigate any collection system conveyance problems before it gets to the wastewater treatment plant. And at that point, you know, these can be time phased, they can be basin specific. So, you know, not necessarily recommending a system-wide SSES or hydraulic model. You know, we want to be very targeted based off the information we just learned from the flow monitoring data, so that it can be cost efficient, so that we can help target the specific types of defects that we want to go out and remove, so that we can begin to mitigate I&I throughout the collection system in the most cost-efficient manner. And those were the biggest findings from this study and the kind of the recommendations on how to move forward. We put together a report and issued it to kind of Jeff and Grant to help understand all of this. And like I said, we can open it up to questions on any specifics from here.
Send me that report. Yes, yeah, we can. Yeah, I think it's important to
No,
note.
we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year pumping rainwater. We sell 500 million gallons of rainwater, or 500 million gallons of potable water, and we treat 1 billion gallons of water. So we're paying through this I&I, we're getting about 500 million gallons a year of rainwater in our sanitary sewer system that we then have to pay to treat. So, yeah, I could send you guys that report, but I think, you know, get a little bit of direction here, and Grant, you can chime in if you want, but, you know, to know that what basins are contributing the most, and that gives us a place to start or to focus, because I think if you go into this blind, you can spend a lot of money, and not really make that much progress mitigating the problem. So you're not going to eliminate all I&I. I mean, you're going to have some, it's just part of it. But I think what we've gotten through this and working with Burns McDonald is you know, a way to identify where it's at and be cost effective in getting it or preventing it from getting into the system. So,
Grant, did any of these results surprise you, or did you have a pretty good idea where the?
One of the major findings we found in the big quadrant did surprise me. We found an issue with business that is still, we're trying to remedy that. Putting some rainwater in our system. That was kind of shocking. But you know, it was the results paid us back immediately. You know, we immediately found a major issue that we can address. And it kind of, the rest of it was, we kind of understood the areas. There were some, just the age of the homes, you know, kind of tell you where you're at. We were on the right page with ours, with what we were doing.
Yeah.
To the public, Maine, it's the private side that those areas that it really did narrow it down, and I think it kind of pinpoints we could come up with a plan or a system to attack the private side. This would really pinpoint where we need to start, and we're not chasing our tail.
Yeah.
yeah, what was interesting, I don't know if you guys noticed, you know, your peaking factor table didn't necessarily correlate to your volume. The highest peaking factor was a residential area, but it was one of the lowest contributors to I&I. I think it was almost a 10-to-1 peaking factor, and it was 3%. I don't remember what's back here, but it's relatively low when it came to the volume. Yeah, it was 4.31%, which is FM 102. So I think that really, you know, kind of, because really volume is where you want to focus, I think, to a degree. And I think that your residential areas and your commercial areas, you know, when you've got the commercial area, which goes out here in the west, it has a lower peaking factor. But when you multiply a volume that's normally higher than what residential would be, That's why you're seeing the larger contribution to the volume from that area. So, I mean, I think if you really kind of get into this and look at it in detail, you can get a lot from it, and we're gonna work to develop a plan moving forward. So, but yeah, I think you know, like I say, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year pumping rainwater, and that's a community problem, not just a utility problem. I mean, our customers are ultimately paying to have that water pumped. So, but I think this is a really good foundation in place for us to start.
Do you know the amount we pay to treat that excess water?
Tony's figured that it's several hundred thousand.
$250,000.
About $250,000 annually. Yeah,
That's just a utility
that's utility.
pumping costs.
Pumping cost.
I'm looking at slide 4, and it's that graph chart, and I'm curious, so we do have some, I don't see the correlation. We have some periods when we had some high rainfall, but yet the flow rate was low, and in some it's just the opposite, where we had high rainfall, and then that drove up the flow. What's the difference there?
Dustin, did you hear that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can take a first shot at it. So rainfall can be kind of tricky, and a lot of it depends on how closely the rainfall is connected. Because what happens is when it rains, some of that rainfall can be stored in the surface, on the surface, along the surface, if you will, in just little ponds and whatnot. But as you get rainfall events that are closer together and that kind of like in the very middle where we see those peaks, we've got a lot of rain that happened pretty close together within 5 days of one another. So a lot of that storage that's available out in the watershed or out in the community is already consumed, so that you can ultimately generate higher peak flows when that storage is not available, because it allows it to get into the system faster because it's not sitting in those pooled areas. So that's one of the reasons why. It also can dictate kind of just which direction the storm was going, because a lot of times the storm can be more prevalent in the northern part of town or the southern part of town. And, these rain gauges are, we try to spatially distribute them the best that we can. But in some instances, this particular basin may not have seen as much rain as it was actually at the rain gauge. So you can kind of see some differences in responses.
There's some art and some science that kind of marry together with what Dustin does. So, I mean, if it's been dry a long time and you get a slow, steady rain, it's just going to get soaked up. If it's in the spring and it's been raining quite a bit and the ground's saturated, it's going to run off pretty quick.
It's going to start to infiltrate quicker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Dustin, would some of that tie into rainfall intensity? Say you get an inch over 2 hours versus an inch in 30 minutes. Would that have an effect on this as well?
Absolutely, yeah. Intensity is a big one.
Because again, those directly connected sources, those downspouts, cleanout caps, potentially area drains. If you get a really intense rainfall event, it can get to those direct sources quickly and cause massive peaks, to where if you just had a kind of a slow, steady rain that generated the same amount of rainfall, but over maybe a 48-hour period of time, you're going to have a lot less impact on the peak flow, just because it's going to enter the system kind of in that slow, steady pace. So in that case, it might take kind of a lot longer for the system to recover back to those dry weather conditions, but it's still not going to generate those really large peak flows within the system.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm just curious, FM 106, where was it at?
And we'll get this presentation to you guys.
Okay.
Sorry, we're hoping to
That's the PowerPoint.
Okay, so there you go.
Yeah. Slide 6 does say, I think 106, but it includes one of our largest
Right.
industrial customers.
Right.
Yeah. It's a kind of the northern.
Yeah, I'd say that would be.
So do you know where that monitor was stationed at?
Yeah, it's placed on, it'd be back on, if you go to slide 6, there's a star right there, and I don't know what, without zooming in, but I would say.
I
Okay.
think it was on at Conway lift station.
Okay.
Yeah, this map on slide 3 page 2, this one that's got the colors on it. I think I.
I'd have to zoom in.
Yeah, they can kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Don't hold me to that, but
I think that's 6. Oh, yeah, that's the one here right there.
Yeah.
So it's kind
It's
of
just kind of hard to get out here. More detail. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Computer.
Yeah.
they've got the hang right.
Yeah, I did send the PDF, I think, to you guys yesterday, so if you haven't
You
checked your
did.
MMU
Yeah.
account, this will be on there where you can really kind of zoom in. Right. Right.
I would like to, what's your next step?
Well, that's what we're figuring out. We've talked about smoke testing these high areas, and to see if there's anything on our side we can do. We need to develop a plan. It's all pointing towards, we need to develop a plan towards the private side. As Jeff has reiterated a bunch, if we're gonna spend $250,000 pumping this and treating this water, maybe, there's options we can do, spend that money on the front side and not get it there, whether it's a plan, partial payment with the customers that we go in and unhook foundation drains or what that plan is, we haven't really narrowed down, but we're looking at trying to spend that money on the front end to get it to not be at the wastewater plant instead of pumping it, paying to pump it.
Yeah, I think talking with Bergen McDonald, smoke testing is really a good place to start. And I think, if you'll look here on slide 9, our wet weather volume, there's just a few basins that account for almost 80% of our I&I. So we got a pretty good place to start with smoke testing. And I think, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, once you kind of get into there and seeing where your problems are at, then you can formulate a plan to kind of address those moving forward. So I think it's important to kind of get an inventory of the issues, and then come up with a plan to, and some of them may be low-hanging fruit. Like I say, we're working on one right now, I think, with the local industry. We've had a meeting with them Wednesday, and we're going to work with them, and that'll be some of this low-hanging fruit. But again, I think it's important to know what those issues are and where they're at, and then formulate a plan to address them.
Yeah, just a few fundamental things. Having a spot to store the data as you picked it up when the smoke testing. If you want to do a smoke test, be like, okay, some guy put it on a piece of paper somewhere in a file. You'd like to tie that in with a GIS platform that, Grant, I think you guys have already got pretty well developed. We would just need to add some information to that so that you can go back and fix those problems as they make themselves known. The other piece of it is you're spot on. You want to, I listen to a lot of Dave Ramsey. He talks about snowballing your debt. You're kind of doing that with your collection system because it's bigger than you can handle like in one shot. So collection system work takes years and years and years. And when you're done fixing all of it, you're probably going to have to start over again at the front side of it and rework that program. But the piece that I want us to remember is that if we can pick out like a red area and focus on that red area with, I'll call it gazelle intensity, you can get in and fix that area. If you go all over town and just chase problems, the water's just going to find the next spot that's open to leak into. Is this making sense, Grant?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you try and tighten up an area at a time instead of hopscotching all over the place. Dustin, did I say anything that made you wince there?
No, I think you had it right, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, I think, smoke testing is a great first step because you can understand how much is on the private versus how much is on the public side. And then to your point, Jeff, like I said, you can kind of attack those basins. A lot of times it makes a lot of sense to start in the upper parts of the system just because you remove the most amount of water that has to be conveyed throughout the entire collection system. And in this case, a lot of those basins are kind of on the upper ends of the collection system, so that I&I takes the longest path to get to the plant. So taking it out in those upper basins provide the most value to the wastewater system in terms of trying to mitigate problems long term.
Yeah, what oftentimes happens, folks will end up lining major interceptor pipes and leaving those upstream smaller diameter pipes leaky. What you've ended up doing is making a big slip and slide to the wastewater plant. And I know Nolan's talked about this before, but he ends up with a full basement at that headworks during the springtime when you get a heavy rain, and it's not supposed to be full. There's a lot of mechanical equipment that sits down there that has to be repaired after that basement gets drained down. So ultimately, I think that's a big piece of what we're trying to do is mitigate what's happening in Nolan at the wastewater plant, but also restore and rehabilitate the collection system for Marshall Municipal Utilities.
Yeah, this
did I-
problem's
is
been,
that
I
right?
mean,
Okay.
Stephen knows, this problem's been around for forever. And I'd hate to even think how much money we've spent as a community pumping rainwater. And I think this is a really good starting point. We have addressed it on the utility side. I think underground facilities over the last 20 years has probably eliminated quite a bit on the public side. So I think, with some smoke testing and that kind of stuff, but we really need to move forward. You're just throwing money out the window. If you don't try to do something, you look at $250,000 over a 10-year period. That's a lot of money that you spent, and you absolutely got nothing for it. I mean, it was just, for lack of a better word, we flushed it down the drain. So I think this is a really good point to start. It's got really good information there, and I think we'll come back to you guys with some type of plan, whether it's smoke testing or whatever, to continue to move forward with this.
Does that slide 8 with the red, does that kind of point us that makes us think where the biggest factors are maybe in some of the newer construction to the south and to the east, where it's red on FM 105 and 104?
Some of those areas, that's a lot of foundation drains.
But it's newer, it's got newer home construction.
Newer home, yeah.
As we
Like
move
70s.
to that way.
70s and newer.
I think in Grant could add to this quite a bit. I mean, there was a period of time when there was a lot of homes built where foundation drains were connected directly to the sanitary sewer.
Yes, there was.
And the material for laterals, that Orangeburg stuff in the early 70s and mid 70s it's a horrible product. It's basically cardboard, and it's not there now. So
Yeah, I think this probably confirms some things you probably thought of already to a degree.
How much resistance can you expect from homeowners who don't want to have smoke testing? What's the thought there? And I'm sure there'll be some resistance.
Yeah, I don't know that, I mean, I think we can smoke test our system. And is there any limitations to prevent us from smoke testing our system? Because theirs is tied to it, it's gonna happen.
Yeah, so we do a lot of this, and I'll let Dustin tag on to it. Dustin, I think Allison's on the phone too. We do this in North St. Louis County. So if you want to talk about some potential hazards, it's there. What we do is a pretty strong communication program before we even start to smoke test. So we'll put out door hangers, we'll knock on doors if we're doing it. But we would suggest that program for you guys too if you're going to self-perform that or hire somebody. That communication piece is huge. And then also getting with like the fire department, like, hey, we're going to be smoke testing. So if somebody missed it and didn't fill the trap in the basement that maybe dried out over the winter, and they end up with a bunch of smoke in their home, and you got like 5 houses in a row with that problem, the fire department knows, oh, I don't need to go kick the door in. It's probably these guys smoke testing out on the sewer system, and they've just filled the house with smoke. You'll see it come out a lot of their, just the vent for the home. It'll come out the top of it. So, but communication is key. Anything else there, Dustin or Allie, in terms of smoke testing?
Jeff, can you guys hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Allie.
One thing to note for Marshall is that I know that they have a social media presence with Facebook, so that's another easy way for us to make sure that the public is notified. If it was a targeted area, the mailings, the door hangers, things of that nature are helpful, but if it was ever going to span the entire utility, social media is really helpful also, just so that homeowners don't see smoke, maybe in the streets or coming out of homes at various locations throughout the utility and feel a little bit nervous.
And kind of just one example, and I mean, I think again, communications the best way to kind of offset any potential negative impacts, and part of that communication is exactly what Jeff hit on, is what can you as a property owner do to kind of offset any issues. So kind of just filling up, putting water in any traps, running all your sinks, pouring water in all your drains. And if your home's plumbed correctly, ultimately the test shouldn't have any impact on you as a homeowner. And the amount of time that the smoke would be present would only be a couple of minutes. Ultimately, we only test a couple of reaches at a time. So, certainly they would be aware of when it's going to occur and how long it would last. So it's, the impact, if there would be any smoke, is very short term, and we would certainly explain, what type of smoke it is. It's a non-toxic smoke. It's made for this particular application. But if there were any specific health hazards, there are things that can be done to prevent, very specific homeowners from, we could basically put plugs in the lateral for a very short period of time to make sure that no smoke would enter that residence due to any major health concerns.
Smoke testing is dry weather, so you can pick up like that Orangeburg pipe that's totally deteriorated. You want to see that smoke come to the surface. Any other questions or comments about that piece of it?
Sounds like smoke testings are next step.
Sounds like it.
Yep. Just figure out how, get a grant and come up with a plan on how we want to do that.
And have that plan on my desk by Christmas.
Put a bowl on it.
We can do it. You bring the lighters.
If there's nothing else, thank you, Dustin, and thank you, Jeff.
Yeah,
Thank you guys
Thank you.
so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
And thank you, Ally.
Have a great holiday.
Yep, thanks, Jeff, appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
If there's nothing else, I guess we'll move into reports. Tony, I guess you're up first.
Morning. At the last board meeting, we brought a draft of the interdepartment loan policy. Hadn't made no changes and hadn't heard any recommended changes. So with that, we just have it here for the recommendation to approve this policy and then to create the interdepartment loan fund with a $5 million cap. You guys have any other questions or anything?
Goodbye.
Yeah, I don't think I have any questions. I think it's it'll be a good policy. It lets us know where our dollars are going. We're kind of forward and trip down. I still have a little issue with the interest rate we'll be paying ourselves, but I guess legally we gotta do at least T-bills, is that it?
Yeah. We'll know here. Those are reevaluated at the end of December, so we'll, like anything, they're readjusted twice a year, so.
The Fed didn't help us yesterday either.
No. No, so I guess it just kind of is what it is. And that's what you gotta do.
Some communities, like when the house turns over, they'll force them.
Well, I would move that we approve the interdepartmental loan policy and to create an interdepartmental loan fund with a funding cap of $5 million effective December 16, 2022.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the interdepartmental loan policy and to create an interdepartmental loan fund with a funding cap of $5 million effective December 16th, 2022. If there's no additional questions, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries.
Well done, Tony.
Thank you, guys. Yep. The next action item there we have this every year. We reevaluate the POD and the TSS rates based on the calculations in the sheet provided in there. We did see a slight increase of one penny, a couple pennies on the other on TSS. They kind of fluctuate looking back. You can see up there they kind of go back and forth. Then at the bottom of that sheet is kind of the 3-year average of what it's been in the past years. you go up there, you can kind of see it looks like our flow was down quite a bit. Of course, it was a drier season we had, but kind of the past years, the inflow there has been pretty high. I think our revenue on this is around $40,000 or $50,000 a year is what it generates.
And as I look at this, I see that our BODs in the last 3 years have declined in pounds per year. And also our total suspended solids, other than, they seem to be declining. But yet we're gonna increase our cost. To me, that's, and just what we talked about in I&I, yeah, it was a dry year, but that rainwater should have been clean water that wouldn't have contributed, I don't think, to the BODs and the total suspended solids.
Well, that's why the price went up, because there was less volume to slide that into without the rainwater. It's kind of, you don't want the rainwater in there, but
So
when you're looking at your surcharge,
It's
is it
solution by
dilution?
dilution.
Dilution by,
Yeah.
whatever that
Yeah.
saying is.
Uh-huh. You just add more clean water.
Right, so, I kind of knew when he was calculating this, that it was gonna be higher, just because there's less flow, because you include rainwater, when you include what our costs are to treat those, so.
And this is what we charge our industrial customers based when they exceed the limits on the permits.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and they do a pretty good job of staying below.
Yeah, not exceeding their limits, exceeding the domestic strength.
Domestic strength, right.
And then there's another limit that's a surcharge, isn't it? Or
So this is the surcharge above
violation.
domestic,
Yeah.
and then,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, they I think we have 3 of those, so you count 2 for each one, so you got 6 parameters there, and typically, we only see one exceeded every month where there's a surcharge paid. Most of the time, it's, they're keeping it below that domestic level on their side, so. Pretty small cost overall, for those customers compared to their normal, sewer bill.
And this does have to go to.
It does, it is a rate, so it would have to go to council for approval.
No. I know how I'm gonna vote. Well, I think it's just,
Explain it to me.
we're kind of penalizing our industrial customers to some degree by increasing these rates, but yet the level of BODs and total suspended solids have declined.
So is it costing us any more for this?
No, it's kind of in the permits too, though, isn't it? It's part of the permits.
The pretreatment permits?
Pretreatment permits.
Yes.
So it's, which is DNR, so part of this is not, DNR, and I think it's in our sewer use ordinance as well, that we do this, so it's just, I believe we have to charge for extra strength, is that correct? Anything over domestic strength?
Yeah.
And I guess the only question is how you do that. This has been the practice we've used in determining what those costs are. And they're only paying if they exceed. I see what you're saying, Chuck.
Yeah. I almost feel like we're trying to sustain the same level of income with a lower, and maybe I probably am wrong, but with a lower level of those streams.
And maybe that's why they do a 3-year average to kind of, you know, because if you look, the rate went up to 28 and then 27. So looking at the past 3 years, it kind of gives it more of a stable average. That's kind of how I look at it.
That takes the impact of that rainwater flow.
But that's what I'm looking at, Tony, is the last 3 years on the BODs, it's dropped from 1.8 to 1.5.
Let me ask you a question. I don't look at it as keeping our income the same. I look at it as keeping, I mean, that's an additional expense that somebody's going to have to incur. And since these industries are the ones that are incurring that expense, in my opinion, that's probably their responsibility. Is that somewhat correct?
Well, I think you want to keep, and I think that's part of the pre-treatment permits, you want to keep those numbers down because.
Right.
Because you're dividing, you know, we're only rated, our plant is only rated for so many BODs or TSSs, and we have to allocate those. So, and Noel knows more about that than I do, so, you know, if we didn't have this and they didn't have pre-treatment, then they may use up most, if not all, of what we're permitted or allowed to do.
And then the whole rest of our customer base would have to absorb the additional cost, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's
Or you
kind of,
exceed your capacity to treat.
right, we do see, so you want to, I think it's kind of, it's not really a penalty, it's an incentive for them to keep their.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying, but yeah, it's, no, that cost would be
I mean,
spread out across the entire.
If this wasn't in place, there wouldn't be an incentive for there to pre-treat.
Correct.
And that's all we're doing is setting a point.
Yeah, and our customers do a good job, I think,
Yeah.
like I mentioned, and when it is, I think when they do exceed that domestic strength, it's not by a lot, it's pretty minimal.
And I understand what Chuck's saying, we don't want to do anything to create any additional problems for especially large customers. But at the same time, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that those same customers do their fair share in taking care of their responsibility so that they don't add that additional burden on to somebody else.
Well, this ties into the permits and sewer use ordinance and other things. So we're just following the requirements that were given by DNR and in our pre-treatment permitting and through our sewer use ordinance. I don't know that we have really a lot of leeway here, do we?
Based off our sewer use ordinance, no.
This is really kind of.
The only thing, and yeah, it's already in the pre-treatment permits. The only thing that changes is we send them the update of what the rates have changed to replace one page in that permit every year if it changes.
Yeah, these are our costs per pound to treat. It's calculated every year. Our costs do fluctuate based on weather and other things, so. And then, if those costs go up or down, it gets reevaluated next year.
So really, right now, we're sitting at 28 cents, but we're only gonna, on a 3-year average, we're at 24 cents, so we're doing 24 cents.
Yep.
What was it, 22 to 24, and then 21 to 24.
Yeah, 21 to 24.
Yeah.
But as the cost of operations go up, that's going to play a role in that cost increasing. In my mind, I think that would.
I'm hoping they go down.
Well, right, yeah, they
Right,
should.
There's a very good
System,
chance.
I'm thinking,
Well, so we talk about dry year, so if this next year we have a really lot of rain and a wet year, our costs are gonna go down.
yep.
That's not right.
We
No,
can take
but
the
that's-
costs down, don't we?
Uh,
So we do this
dilution-
yearly?
What's that?
Do we set these yearly?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
then the average would probably.
So the average go down and then the
Right.
cost.
And the costs I'm talking about going down are our operating costs
Right.
with our new
Yeah.
system. So those costs will drop. You know, if your range stays the same, I think our cost to treat these, the TSSs and the BODs will decrease, just with the improvements we're making at the plant. And I think, you know, the LED lighting will improve that, that'll lower our costs. I mean, but again, yeah, rain, you can't, I mean, I see what you're saying, Chucky.
Yeah.
It's something we're trying to get rid of, but
Yeah.
at the same time, it cuts your cost on, it's just,
Treatment per pound.
yeah. Solution by dilution.
I make a motion to approve setting rates for BOD at 24 cents per pound and TSS at 24 cents per pound effective January 1st, 2023, and request the city council to approve rates as said above.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve setting the rates for BOD at 24 cents per pound and TSS at 24 cents per pound effective January 1, 2023. To request the city council to approve the rates as said above. Any additional discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no.
No.
Motion carries.
Thank you, gentlemen. Not much else there. We did submit off for a second round of reimbursement for Grant 1. We do have we have mobile service ordered. We're gonna get that up and going today. Have it at 10:30, so if the meeting's not over, I might sneak out of here before
Anything else for Tony?
Yeah, what is the mobile service order?
So right now, if there's like rereads or anything that Jose gets sent out to, it's gonna go to a tablet, so you don't have to come up to the office, grab the order. We'll just get it sent right to the tablet.
Oh,
You
okay.
go, yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, I think you could take a picture of the reading on the tablet, send it in, and that'll go right to billing, and just gonna, more efficient.
Getting high tech. I like it.
Okay, we'll move on. Grant, good morning.
Morning, gentlemen. I do have one item this morning. Our second dump truck that's international, the frame was bent while we were dumping rock. This is the third serious issue this truck's had since being fairly new to us. It was the first one, and we're down to one dump truck from 3, I believe it was, or 4. Four.
Counting Nolan's.
And counting Nolan's. With the way it severely slows down progress of work, and with lead times, and I think we can. I know the motion says to request bids, but I think with the seriousness of this, we can kind of skip that process. So this is what the memorandum you have is what we found, and kind of searched the countryside. It's pretty difficult to find one on the lot these days, unless you just happen to get lucky. You know, one of these trucks on this list, I believe, a fellow's financing fell through, so it happened to be on the lot. The downfall of that was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Rush Truck Center, that is on the state contract price. That is fairly close to what we're going to end up giving to the one that we have on order. I believe that cab and chassis was $115,000, and the bed's going to be somewhere around $40,000. So that's probably a better price than we're going to be able to piecemeal the one we've got on order. There's a lot of options for the board, but I believe my recommendation would be to order the truck from Rush Truck Center for $147,480.
What about the option? What do you think?
I think that's the way to go.
Electric
Is
tarp?
electric tarp. I think so. Any time, in my mind, any time you can eliminate somebody getting in and out of that truck and eliminate a slip, trip, and fall hazard, I think that's the way to go. If you can do that for $2,500, I think that's the way.
So that's an additional 25 on it.
It would be additional, I do believe, to that.
Grant, on this truck, there's a comment here, repairing will not guarantee. Did we get a price for repairing it? Do we know what that cost was?
It's obvious that it's bent, and they wanted $1,000 just to look at it. And repairing it presents, from what I understand, liability issues, since it's a third strike. If this would happen to another accident that would harm property that wasn't ours, or God forbid to injure somebody, it would put us at unnecessary risk as a company for repairing it. So repairing is really not an option.
So really all we had was $1,000 to take a look at it, to see what it would cost to repair it.
Yeah, but repairing it, we can't repair it and use it as far as liability goes. It's not an option.
Well, I don't think our mechanics looked at it, and he does not recommend repairing it. He doesn't think we will have.
Like the structural integrity of the trucks.
It's well,
gone.
and just with the history of it, and I think a lot of it goes back to maybe the bed. I think the first problem we had with this truck that was fair to, the bed actually fell off. And then we had it tip over because it had dirt stuck in the bed. Well, I think the same thing happened here and went the same way. And I don't know, there's been enough issues with it.
Well,
I don't think we're gonna be any better off.
correct me
this
if I'm
time.
wrong, I don't think insurance wise that we're able to use it if we repair it.
I think that it was the mechanic and purchasing together spoke with these shops, right, and they wouldn't make any guarantees. Like, yeah, we'll straighten the frame for you, but it's your baby once it's out the door. And we all know what happens to a frame once it's been bent like that.
And if we're in an alley and that thing tips over on somebody's shed, and they go back and say, well, this thing's been messed up 3 times, that puts us at risk if we.
Taking out of service, yeah.
Well, and I know Brian's, I think, familiar with bed frames with race cars and everything else.
And we
I
went
think his
through,
experience with that, he's not comfortable with
we
having
discussed
this
it with
repaired.
Morgan's Diesel, we got their opinion, and then the company's online.
That one from Rush, 370 horsepower. I mean, the rest of them I see are 450, 455, the 370.
Our spec is 350, so it's above the spec that
350 minimum.
Tony, we need this, how we're gonna pay for it?
Yeah, water's got
Difference, isn't it?
about 1.2 million in operating, 2.3 in reserves, so I think
This one's got
we should be
50
good,
now.
yeah.
But it's used.
It's got 108.
Yeah, it's kind of neat, that small.
And 8,900 hours.
Yeah.
I don't think they shut that
12
off.
months
They
delivery
bought it.
time okay for you, or I know we'd like to have it.
Used.
that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
It seems, I mean, I believe that's as quick as you're gonna get one.
That's why I think, and Grant's looked at some other used trucks, and what they want and what you can get is just, and I think that's why the prices are high, is because you just can't, the availability is
In comparison, this one from Rush is $17,000 higher than a few used options. We're talking 2012 models.
As I was over talking to Chuck, International's just that much cheaper than Kenworth's, or?
Typically,
yeah, I think it's kind of like John Deere and Kubota, and then you see that they got the lot bigger horsepower engines, and they may have some more bells and whistles on them, I don't know. you know, our spec is pretty much, I think the spec from Rush Truck Center is pretty much just a general dump truck spec. You know, we don't get a lot of bells and whistles. We want a certain horsepower and we want certain cubic yards and
Automatic transmission.
automatic transmission, because the CDL, CDL used to be, you know, Class B was a Class B. Well, now it's, you got endorsements if, you know, not everybody can drive a manual, so, you know, that adds cost to it. But I think those other ones, if you really got to digging in, are probably a lot fancier trucks.
Aluminum wheels.
Aluminum wheels, yeah, no, they are, yeah, I think if you look at the spec, they've got aluminum wheels and
Racing stripes.
Yeah.
just things,
yeah.
things we don't need,
So, because this isn't budgeted, Tony, how do we fund this?
We'll probably fund it out of the reserves, which we have 2.3 million in there.
Okay.
So, and actually, by the time you get it.
Yeah, actually, we probably won't have to pay for it for a year,
Or more.
so that gives us a little bit more time.
It could be in the budget, it could be in the budget next year. I mean, you know, you could make that adjustment to the budget.
Is it a simple powertrain warranty, or is it?
Yeah, just a simple, so your standard comes with the standard one.
3 years?
3 years. I don't know the mileage, I can't tell you that. I could look that, find that for you, but I don't have it right now. And we're typically going to, the mileage isn't the issue. We put more engine hours on it than we do miles.
Yeah.
So you want to amend this recommendation to purchase?
The truck from Rush Truck Center
Yeah.
for $147,000
With the electric tarp?
with the electric tarp
Yeah.
option, yes.
Yeah, that's a state contract through Sourcewell. That's a national cooperative procurement that does these bids annually, so we don't have to go through the bid process. And it was actually on the state of Missouri website for government procurement.
Well, I'm certainly not for buying a used one. I'd really go ahead and get a new one.
And in the meantime, he's borrowing a truck from Municipal Services.
So I will make I guess we really don't need to just amend the recommendation.
Yeah, just make it.
Okay, so I would make a motion to purchase a new dump truck for number 224 replacement from Rush Truck Center, International 2024 HV 507 FVA for the price of $147,480 with an optional electric tarp at $2,534.
Second. Motion, excuse me, it's been made and seconded to approve a new 2.5-ton dump truck from Rush Truck Center for $147,480 and include an electric tarp for $2,534. Any additional discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Thank you, gentlemen. I don't have anything to add to the packet unless the board has any questions.
Anything else for Grant? Thank you, Grant. Travis, good morning.
Morning.
Travis.
I have an action item this morning too. It's on the filter media replacement project. It's to replace the media and the remaining 3 filters. We did get one bid back. This was a budgeted item. It is the same company that we used for the last year. And they did do a good job of just prolonged and everything, but everything is working well from that. So this time my recommendation is to motion to accept the proposal from CNC Environmental Services Incorporated in the amount of $87,950.
And do they think they can start 3 to 4 weeks?
Possibly, That's kind of what they, that's kind of what they told us the last time.
Yeah.
But then we had the issue with the availability of the media and things,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
We'll give them a shot. See if they come through.
Yeah.
Make a motion to accept proposal from CAC Environmental Services, Inc. in the amount of $87,950.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to accept the proposal from CNC Environmental Services, Inc. in the amount of $87,950. If there's no additional discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Not really much else to add unless you guys have any questions.
Anything else for Travis? Thank you, Travis. Doug, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
I do have an action item for you today.
We quit.
Anyway, this is for the Miami 1 substation transformer switchgear replacement. This is a budgeted item. This part of the Miami substation was built in 1984-85. It was put in service. It has 161 kV circuit switcher, 25 MVA transformer, grounding transformer, a 15 kV metal clad switchgear lineup with 9 15 kV breakers in there, and an auxiliary switch that feeds units 10 and 11 horsepower. We did upgrade the protective relays in 2002, and in 2003 the sub suffered a significant fault in the switchgear, and I think we've had lasting effects from that. We've had repairs to the tap changer and the transformer before. Because of this, we think we're actually having trouble with the tap changer currently. I have scheduled a crew to come in. I've contacted 3 different companies that can work on that, and all 3 are out to the first week of January. So I've got a crew scheduled the 9th. With the recent trouble we had with the Miami 2 substation, transformer tap changer, we was able to get a tech in pretty quick to get that fixed. But we were lucky there. But anyway, I'll go ahead and like to move forward with this project. It is in the budget, like I said, $250,000 budgeted for this year. It's going to be an ongoing project. It's probably going to last at least probably 2 or 3 years, maybe longer, depending on delivery of material, the way things are now. We'd like to get that started by selecting an engineering firm to design the project, to write specs for the equipment material. So with that, my motion is to request statements of qualifications for engineering services to replace the Miami 1 transformer and switchgear.
And that station, the breaker design in that substation is really, has never been, in my opinion, particularly compared to the other substations we have, has not been good. We have had problems with it from the very beginning.
Yeah, the switchgear design really wasn't that well. It's a metal clad outdoor. In the early days, there was a lot of condensation. Water, you would go in the building, water was dripping on your head. And so that caused some problems just with the water, the amount of condensation that was in the building. And in some attempts to dry it out, there was heaters hung in there, and so it took care of the condensation, but caused other problems with drying every lubrication point out on the breakers, causing problems with the breakers, and just the simple design of the breaker cubicles themselves, the way they rack in, the way the auxiliary contacts are on the side of the breakers. We've had a lot of trouble with those constantly, and just like Jeff said, it's just a poor design. It's time. It's
probably overdue, to be honest with you. The floors are warped, so when you try to roll the breakers in to rack them in, and there's a fork that sticks out on the side that it's called the mock switch, that you know, it's got A and B contacts, and it says the breaker's closed or the breaker's open. And Jared can probably tell when they go to, you know, put units 10 and 11 online, that goes through that sub, and sometimes they don't get closed indication. I mean, and you can go over there and work on it, and 2 days later, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of problems there that aren't fixable. It's just, and again, it's, you know, 40 years old. I think over the years we've made a lot of attempts and modifications to get this much life out of it, you know, with the moisture and everything else. But Chuck was there, and I think got to witness one of the that major event. It was, not a lot of fun.
Especially when you're dealing with those voltages.
Totally. Whenever the utility guys were running past me, I'd go,
None of them grabbed you to haul you up.
No, it was each
Nice
one for
of them.
themselves.
But yeah, that's a really important sub. That's probably one of our hubs. So it's, and I think, the issue we had the other day with an outage, I know Doug's working with Toth. You guys are aware that we had an issue on the north part of town with a squirrel and things not coordinating. And part of that was due to, the issues we were having with this, so.
Alright. Make a motion to request statements of qualifications for engineering services to replace Miami One transformer and switchgear.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded to request statements of qualification for engineering services to replace the Miami One transformer and switchgear. Any additional discussion or questions? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, gentlemen. Not much else to add, other than the tap changer Miami 2 was repaired. That tech that came up to work on that is a Ryanhausen tap changer. That guy actually worked for Ryanhausen for 30 years before he joined Waukesha, so we definitely had the right man on the job. The T1, Transformer 1 tap changer, that is a Federal Pacific, so it's Federal Pacific transformer, Federal Pacific tap changer. In trying to line some crews up to come in and work on that, I was able to find out that there's only like 3 or 4 companies in the United States that's capable of working on that piece of equipment. So you definitely don't want some fly-by-night, somebody that says they can do it. I think I have Waukesha scheduled to do that now. They're scheduled to come in the 9th, and I think they'll be able to take care of it. So, anything else to add unless you have any questions for me?
Yeah, Doug, I do have a question. The southeast substation, new transformer, switchgear, you say you'll need an outage to finish the install.
The circuit switcher, because we're getting so close to the 161 energized bus, it's just not worth.
Yeah. And how long of an outage?
It depends. I'm contacting the S&C people now as far as to trying to see what they need to commission that breaker. So if they just need the breaker up and standing and not connected to the transmission line, if they can commission it that way, I'll go ahead and finish the erection of the switch. We'll have to take a brief outage to get the switch mounted and everything, which I can't do it now, obviously, because the transformer out of Miami One. But once we get that done and everything, I can take an outage. Then we'll mount the switch. They can come in, commission it. If they need it connected, we'll probably take a brief outage to hang the switch, energize the transmission line again, work through our issues with the transformer, and then take another outage to modify the bus to make the connections on.
Are these like a day outage or?
To change this, to actually hang the switch, yeah, it's probably just about a day or so. But to modify the bus, I'm looking at maybe a couple weeks at the most.
Okay.
Yeah, and when he means outage, it's just an outage on our side.
Yeah,
We'll
just take that.
backfeed
Yeah,
everything
you'll have-
and.
Yeah, just an outage on the bus itself,
Yeah.
right there, localize it, so.
Thank you.
Anything else for Doug? Thank you, Doug. Jared, good morning.
Morning.
Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Got just a couple updates for you. The storm shelter is finished. Grant's guys came over and helped us get that backfilled and finished up. And also the 10-11 lighting project is also completed, and we've already noticed a pretty significant difference in the auxiliaries over there. And the lighting is a whole lot better. So that's pretty much all I've got, unless any questions.
How many people can get in the storm shelter?
It says 12. We got a couple of good
Like
sized
sardines?
guys. Hopefully we won't be in there very long if we have to go in there.
It's good to have it, yeah.
So are there steps or?
There are.
How many?
4, I believe.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's partially in ground, partially out?
Yep. Yep.
Do you feel comfortable with it?
I do.
Okay, that's all I care about.
I already have had several guys say just that peace of mind makes them feel better being there all night. And if that hopefully never happens, but if it does, they've got someplace to go.
It's just like insurance. You do it and hope you never have to take advantage of it. Okay, well. Any questions for Jared? Thank you, Jared. Nolan? Good morning.
Good morning. On the aeration project, that last VFD is actually being set, well, it's in place. It's supposed to be tied in completely today. The control module for the DO and ORP is supposed to be here next week. We're going to have several training things. Next Wednesday, the MCC, VFD, blower people, we're going to have several things going on next Wednesday and Thursday. But overall, it's running really well so far. But I really don't have a lot to add to the rest of that pack unless you all have any questions.
Are you feeling better about it?
Yeah.
Put you on the spot?
I mean, I am. We tried to do some training, I guess that was the middle of last week, on the diffuser rack removal stuff. There's some things that still have to be looked at, but we're working through it. The racks aren't sinking back down into the water like we anticipated they would, so the manufacturer and the engineers are looking at options for us.
Okay. Was it the bridge on the north clarifier? Was that last week we talked to? Or
On the far north aeration basin, yes.
Did you get that?
No, so that happened on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and we actually started pumping into the new basin that following Tuesday.
Okay.
So currently, that basin, the blowers are still running. They're not being stirred, but the flow that's in there is isolated. We're not draining it because we have enough kind of I guess trying to figure everything out with our air and the new final clarifiers and stuff. I think we have some filamentous bacteria growing in that biomass, and we really don't want that in the new. So I think last time I mentioned something about, I know Burns and Mac are working on getting us some information. There's a good chance we're going to pump that out and have that hauled off. So we won't have the old sludge that's kind of been there with, like I say, the filamentous bacteria in it getting into the new system and causing any issues. So, but no, as far as that bridge, we haven't really addressed it. With it being only a week in between when that broke down and when we started the new, and with Schreiber, the company that made those, being out of business now, I don't even know that we could have found parts, but it's no longer necessary, so we're trying to avoid spending money that we didn't have to.
Any other questions for Nolan?
How's the break room? It finished? Still battling it?
It's 99.8% complete. It's pretty simple things, but I'm still waiting to hear back from Joe on a couple little issues. So.
But almost.
Yeah, I mean the guys are using it. It's a whole lot better than it has been.
Anything else for Nolan? Are you gonna take care of Jim's?
He gave me some notes, and if you guys ask questions, he provided me very little information, but I will go ahead and pass that along. Jim is a man of few words. The fiber on the WW area is pulled, and they're about 75% done with the splicing there. So they need, there's some aerial cable that they had to increase the size of for the fiber count. But splicing requires good weather to do, so I'm just going to he's kind of waiting for some better weather before they can get that finished up. They're starting to prep the area south of there, the 200th area, and then Coleman is just about finished on a couple places on YY, and then he'll be done with the round one reconnect grant. Trying to keep moving forward on the second one. And I've got just a little bit in my section on that. customer count or anything, but I know they're moving along.
Okay. I haven't seen any five yet.
We'll move on to Megan.
Hi, Megan.
Good
Morning, Megan.
afternoon. I'm not going to add to what's in your packet, but I will be happy to try and answer any questions.
Any questions for Megan?
Yeah, she's done enough here this past couple months,
Yeah.
to leave her alone.
Leave her alone for a little while.
I guess just the vacancies, are you getting some applicants? You haven't, or is it like everywhere else?
I mean, we're not seeing the numbers we would have seen 2-3 years ago, but we're starting to see a little bit come in from that latest round of posts, yeah. And today's the last day open enrollment, so we're working on getting all that wrapped up and sent to Blue KC, so hopefully folks can get some insurance cards before January 1 rolls around.
Guess we'll move on to Jeff. Morning, Jeff.
Morning, Joe.
Morning, gentlemen. I do have one action item this morning. It relates to the round 2 USDA Reconnect grant. We developed what was called a non-standard contract for the first round. RUS they kind of modeled this program after the rural electric, and rural electric cooperatives aren't governmental agencies, so their standard contract, we had things that we needed to include that weren't covered in that. So we developed a non-standard contract. They approved that for round 1. And you know, it's kind of new to them, so I think they had some trouble determining whether we needed approval for that again or not. So you can see you guys initially approved this at the September 15th meeting. We finally got approval from USDA that says, yes, you can go ahead and use the same contract you used the first round. But because of the size of the project, it is a contract that needs to go to the city council for approval. So I've got a recommendation there that request the city council authorize the mayor to sign that contract with Coleman Plumbing.
Make that motion to request the city council authorize the mayor to sign the contract from Coleman Plumbing for conduit, pull box, and pedestal installation for the round 2 Reconnect grant.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded to request the city council authorize the mayor to sign the contract from Coleman Plumbing for conduit, pull boxes, and pedestal installation for the round 2 Reconnect grant. There's no additional discussion or questions. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, gentlemen. Did attend the MPUA meetings last week. Really the big thing to come out of that is there was a change in the National Electric Safety Code. Not a good change in my opinion, but it's changed, and now we'll have to address it. Previously, your pole was always divided up into sections. You had the supply space, which was reserved for electric, and then you had the communication space, which would allow your cable TV, telephone, those type of communications. And those were always kept separate. But with this push on the new small cell towers that they put on utility poles, this code change allows them to go into the supply space and be within 16 inches of 15,000 volt. So there could be some liability there. In the language, it's written that they have to be qualified. Basically, what this is going to do is require a journeyman lineman certification to install these things. So there was some discussion down there about putting in city ordinances that would basically spell out those requirements, and you could even specify that we would do it and charge them, or however that may be. MPUA's got some staff down there, but I think that we can't keep them from doing it, but I think we can word that where it's to our advantage or favor when it comes to that type of work going on. So, not a lot of cities have seen any recent requests. The one that was, I talked to a gentleman in Lebanon, and I think what it is when you get next to a mall or somewhere where there's a lot of people, and it overwhelms the existing cell tower, they can go in and at a very low cost install these small cell applications and to add that additional coverage. But he hasn't heard anything lately, so he's hoping that that's kind of gone away. But anyway, that's kind of the big thing down there. You can see there's some rate cases filed. You know, I think a lot of that's due to natural gas prices. Just about every private utility in the state is either filed for a rate increase or will be. So I think that's, you know, in some cases you're looking there at Ameren's, you know, 11% increase in their revenue. Liberty had just settled a pretty large rate case, and now they're going back to ask for another fuel charge adjustment based on the gas cost. So kind of some issues going on there. Just continue to work on our peer review stuff, getting closer there. It's going along. If you guys have any questions about that or anything, just gotta let me know.
Check another one off the list.
Check another one off the list, yeah. You know, I think those were really good suggestions, and I think it's staff's done a good job of working to get through those. Not much else. FEMA, for the wastewater damage, I did submit the last P4, which is your completion on the category F. The only one we have outstanding now is the category E, which is the dump trucks. And I had to file for an extension on the completion date on that because just the lead time got pushed back. So I think we've got all our federal funds there. I think the only thing we're waiting on now is 10% from the state. So I think you got a check a week or two ago for $162,000. So we're slowly but surely recouping the cost of all of that flood. And that's about all I have. Be glad to answer any questions.
Tell Mud to get up off my name.
Get up off your name.
Yeah.
MEC.
Yeah.
Oh, Marshall Electric Commission.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can't do that.
Well, what they shortened it because it used to be the Missouri Joint Municipal Electric Utility
Mud,
Commission.
right?
They called it MUDSMUC, and now it's MEC. So yeah, we got your color sheets in there, Spencer.
Thank you, bud.
Yeah.
If there's no other questions for Jeff, I guess we'll move on to cash disbursement.
Oh, well, you know, I don't want that one. It's too high. Give me another one.
Yeah.
You think it's Christmas?
There's not a Burns bill in there, so.
Oh my gosh.
It's a little.
No, and I told Kevin the other day to spread that one out, that Tony was worried. We know we got to pay it. Just don't hit us with it all at once.
Oh, we're fine.
Essentially got purchase power in here.
Yeah, it's really hard.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yes, you got what it is. Pattern, you need purchase power in there. That's a bill, well, you see the bill, and it's worth $1 million.
Yeah.
There was a payment in there too for Coleman for. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you spend, 200 and some thousand, you get reimbursed?
Yeah.
Hard to wrap those up before we get some money. For sure. That's the paperwork that involves the bids.
give up.
And then you got quarterly reports and.
I think that's true, yeah. This one, where you at? That is, yeah, I know. Yeah, you just pull back. It's just, yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
And then they approve it in an hour.
You ever do that to Chuck?
No.
I'll never admit that. If you did, you wouldn't say it.
I even think 5 years after we're done with it, we still gotta submit quarterly reports, so.
Yeah, and all the FEMA stuff, well, I'm just doing a quarterly report for that. It's gotta be in the same folder, in the same file, as if when they come in and audit it. Jennifer's had fun figuring out category E and F and all that fun stuff.
Chuck always just did what he wanted.
I read all of them, I read them all. I'd make a motion that we pay the disbursements as presented.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve cash disbursements. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next scheduled board meeting is Thursday, December 29th. Okay.
Carl said he may try to make that one.
Spencer remembers the text number 4.
Yeah, Carl said he may try to make that one. He intended to be here today, but something came up, so.
Well, we can have 2 chairs here for a little while.
Yeah. Works for me.
Okay, if there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Only